Welcome once again to the J Lowe Artist YouTube channel. Thanks for joining me on this artistic adventure. Today we'll be working with ink, pen and ink. So have your kneaded eraser, a number 2 or an HB pencil handy, and any type of ink that you would like to use. But make sure that it's archival, that it's permanent, that it's black, and a smooth ink. And let's start doing some ink drawing. Thanks for coming today, and we're going to start out with our number 2 pencil. Now all we're going to do is get our simple shapes. And so remember, we draw with the side of our pencil. If you're doing this grinds it into the surface, and you don't want to do that. So let's just start out very simple shapes. I'm going to start out with that rectangle shape that is the central part of the house that we see. I'm just going to start out with that. Just say, oh, okay, I want it about that big, and it's going to be right down the middle. About that big. And then there's a little side to it. There's an angle. If you look at the little widow's walk, that little place up at the top there, there's kind of a little angle to it. So it's not totally straight across. It's kind of slightly angled. I don't have to put in all the little details, just the basic shapes. The little tower thing is a little bit smaller, so I'm going to just put that in. And I'm going to round it. I know it's not round, but that just helps me to see that all those angles are not straight across. It's not straight across. So I'm just going to do a little arch there. I'll figure out the little angles later. Little roof there. All that stuff I can figure out later on. Here's my roof line. Just start out simple shapes. Just mostly rectangles and triangles here. Also, I don't know. I've left myself a little bit of space onto the left, and I think I'm going to move the house a little bit closer to the edge on the right. So some of those trees might get a little lost, but I'm going to open myself up to some more trees over here. It's one of those compositional things that you just kind of go, that's kind of what I want in there. As an artist, you get to compose this any way you want to. But you also want to compose it in the most interesting way possible. Remember, it's not your subject matter that makes it interesting. It's how it's put together. It's your composition. Just triangles and rectangles. That's all you need. And the cool thing about buildings is if it's not quite exactly right, that's okay. I think most people will recognize it anyway. There was a movie that came out a while ago. I think it was called Practical Magic. Did you ever see that one? I think this is the house that they lived in, or at least that it was filmed at. Because it's kind of that haunted, spooky kind of look to it. If this isn't perfect, it's okay. Nothing's perfect. Just do your best. But also remember, we're going to be simplifying a lot of this. So even though it's going to look like there's a bunch of details in it, it's going to be very simplified. There's a bunch of trees and vines down there towards the bottom. I'm just going to kind of do some little scribbles to remind myself that's what there's there. And there's trees that kind of go up the side. If you wanted to, you could do some little, like a little line to show where the tree trunk is. And if you wanted to, you could just do a shape of the tree with some scribbles. All that does is just remind you that's where those are. We're not really trying to draw them. I'll show you how to draw those with ink. Just scribble, 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 scribble. And there, from the very top left, there's a little bit of tree that comes in there. It's kind of hanging out up there. I'm going to just leave that alone. I'm just not going to put that in there. If you want to, you can put in rectangles for the windows area. But again, we'll be drawing those with ink, and I'll show you an easy way to do those. So I might just put in a couple of rectangles to say this is, this is where this is. Just as guidelines. Everything that we're drawing is going to get erased, so don't get attached to this drawing. It's going to all get erased. Now, if you wanted to, you can draw direct. You don't have to do this little bit of drawing with your pencil. And you can pretty much start wherever you want to start. Some people might start with the negative, like the trees in the background. Some people might want to start in the foreground and work their way up. Me, I like to kind of start from the top and go down. So I'm going to start with the little tower area and work my way down. As I go, I'll do the trees and everything. There is a ton of things in here that we want to leave out. All this railing up in here, you might have a couple little dots and dashes, but for the most part, a lot of that gets left out. All the window stuff up in here, you can see where you can look up into the rafters, up into the ceiling part. That's fairly dark through the windows, but everything else gets left out. This whole edge over here, it's going to get left out. So I'm just going to start with the darkest things that I see, and that is, I'm going to start with the little edge of the roof right there, the little gables of the roof. So I'm just going to go into it, and here's a little line there to show that's where that little gable goes. A little line there, two little lines there, and that's it. If I need to, I can always come back into it. Here's a couple more little edges. Then the top roof line, you could just do a little thin edge there. There's one there. There's one here, just a little one. One off to the side. One over there. And then that little spire that's on top. I'm going to do this little U shape. Not even do the whole circle, because I know that it's lighter on top than it is on the bottom. I'm just going to do a little U shape with a little line in the middle. Maybe a dot up at the top to show that it kind of gets thinner. And voila, that's it. That's all you need. Now, there are some tiles in there, and if you wanted to, you could notice the ones on the left side are darker than the ones on the right. So you may want to put some of those in there. I'm just going to throw some little parallel line in there. Just a little. Don't need a lot. And then this edge over here, I'm going to get rid of that edge. I'm not even going to put it in there. But I'm going to do a couple little dots or dashes to show that shadow that's underneath that little gable thing right there. You can use little lines. You can use dots and dashes, whatever it takes. But it's very light. So instead of a heavy line, you want to just do a couple little dots and dashes. This one is a little thicker, a little darker over here, so you can put more line in there. And just remember that the more line you add, the darker it gets. But I want to leave that little edge out completely. A couple little dots and dashes there towards the outside just shows that that's kind of, there's a little shadow there. There's another one just inside that. A couple little dots and dashes. And I'm barely touching the paper with my pen. You don't have to press down with your pen, because the ink, this is a felt tip pen, and the ink is just going to run out onto it anyway. You got to at least barely touch it. Then there's a little rectangle just inside of that. Let me put this little rectangle right there. Another little rectangle right there. And then I'm just going to hatch through them. Now, I'm sure there's a little panel. If you could see the panels, you can maybe hatch through them and leave the panels out. But I'm just going to hatch through that really quick. And then the rest of it, I can't see it, so I'm going to leave it out. Or if you think, well, I can see a slight edge there, put a couple little dots or dashes right there. But for the most part, you can just leave it out. Do the same thing on the other two windows. Hatch, 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 hatch. Just barely touching it. And that last one is a little darker than all of them, but you might see a little bit of the edge over there. And if you think, well, there's a little shadow up above that, just hatch through it. That's what, about 3 or 4 lines is all. You just hatch through it, and that makes it darker. Then you have the railing that goes around it, and that railing is mostly lost. So just do some little dots and dashes. There's some over there, maybe some this way, little dots and dashes. If you think, well, I can see a little edge that kind of extends up above it, you can put that little edge in there with some dots. But again, basically that's it. If you think, well, I can see some of those little supports that are down there, you can put some little dots or dashes. But remember, a lot of it's gone. And all you're doing is conveying to your viewer, to your audience, that there is a railing there. You don't have to draw it in, as long as they understand that that's what's going on there. Some little dots and dashes. You can see more of it as it goes towards this little cupola thing here. So I'm going to add just a couple little dots and dashes there. Maybe a couple down the middle. Just little dots and dashes. There is where the support goes for the railing right there. It is a little darker. So I may want to throw that in with some line. Or you could use little dots and dashes too. I'm just going to keep it going with just a couple little parallel lines and call it good. This other side's a little darker. So I'm going to use my little dots and dashes that are a little closer together. And there's some little edges, so I can just throw those in really quick. Very thin, light line, barely touching the paper. Now, one of my favorite parts is to get rid of the graphite. This is a little soon. I'd probably keep drawing on it, but I just want you to show you what happens. When you get rid of the graphite, all that sketchy pencil line is gone, and it's just nice and clean. And then you just kind of look into it and add some dots or dashes wherever you think you need to. And voila, that's it. Done. This edge, I'm going to continue to forget that edge. So I'm going to come in. You can see up underneath the eaves, the awning of this little widow's walk. So the first thing I see is a little triangle right there. Just this little triangle. And it's dark, so I'm just going to put some little hatched lines in there, and that's it. Now these little supports that go in there, they're kind of hard to see, so I'm just going to do a little edge there. There's one. Here's one over here. Little triangles. And if you want to continue those down the side, just little dots and dashes. Continue those down the side. And that's your support for the roof. Then you've got a little bit thicker space over here, and then you've got another one that's right there. So I'm just going to throw in that little thick space with, it's kind of a rectangle, but instead of drawing a line around it, I'm just going to hatch a rectangle through it. So there's that little rectangle, then another little support, and it comes down with dots and dashes. Another hatched line. And if it's not the right shape, if you hatch through it and you go, oh, that's not a rectangle, just come back in with some dots and dashes and make your rectangle. Another little one there. Two more right here. There's one, two. Another triangle that goes right there. And then it goes down the side. These are really dark, so I'm just going to hatch through them. Hatch, 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 hatch. In that shape that I see, and the shape I see is a rectangle. Kind of a rectangle at an angle. And we can always come back into this later on and add more line. If we think we got more line, we can add it. Where this starts and stops, though, is going to define our edge. So right below that is this little, you know, I don't know all the architectural terms, but this little design, this little, I don't know, molding that goes up and around there. So if I do that, and then the window is just right there, there's a little piece there, and it's very light, so I may want to, maybe I just need a little dot or a dash right there to show where it is. But the inside of the window, here's a great way to do windows. I'm just going to do the top edge as a double line, and then the inside edge, okay, top edge, little line that goes down. And then the other line, I'm just going to forget it. I'm just not even going to put it in there. And the other side, I'm going to do the same thing. Little line there, and the top edge. There's your window. Now, if you can see, oftentimes light is going to hit that window, and it's going to reflect the sky, so it's going to be light. Well, if it isn't, you can just hatch through it. So just remember, there's a little edge right there. I'm going to leave that edge out. I'm just going to hatch through it. Hatch, 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 hatch. Here's another hatch, 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 hatch. And you can leave out whatever you want to leave out. So if you think, well, there's a little shine right there, I'm going to leave that out. Or there's a little dark area, I could put that in. You can just add that with a couple little dots and dashes. Here's the other one. And there's your windows. Easiest windows you've ever drawn. Window sill, and usually right below the window, there's a little edge right there. So I'm just going to put that in with a little line, or maybe two lines if they're thin enough. And that's it. I'm going to continue this on the other side. Now this side, if you think to yourself, well, it looks silly to leave that out, you can add a dot or a dash, but before you do, when in doubt, leave it out. I'm just going to do this other little edge starting here, put that in, and it goes down this way. Now, if you think to yourself, oh, I can't see that other edge, I need something there, just add a little dot or a dash, and that's all you need. when you get rid of your graphite, that edge takes care of itself. There's no reason to draw that in. And if it's really light, just leave it alone. Nothing wrong with that. Your eye makes that connection. It draws it in. This other side that comes down here is in the shadow, and you can see it. It's kind of dark. So you may want to just come through and go, well, if that other little edge is in the shadow this way, I can hatch through that completely. Little parallel line. Now that's all in shadow. And then you add whatever else you add into it. So I'm going to add a window. These little motifs that come down through there. Your window is kind of the same thing. You start out with the dark edge up at the top, and then a line that goes down. Dark edge up at the top and a line that goes down. There's your window. And you may add a double line if you think, well, it's got to be a little thicker, a little darker in there. Of course, your window sill at the bottom is just going to be a little double line. And they're just little dots and dashes. We're really not doing much detail here, although it looks very detailed. You can darken it in, just add a couple little lines in between the lines you got. You can make it a little darker. I'm just going to go back into this little cupola thing. There are little areas that I think need to go a little darker, so I'm just going to add a little more line, little dots and dashes. Anything that I think is going to help that. Because you could always add more. So as far as architecture goes, that's really about it. Just little dots and dashes, and the closer your lines are, the darker the value. You can crosshatch. You can add other little lines in there. Whatever you feel like you need. So as we move down, we're going to do the same thing. I've got my little edges here. This one's got a little double edge, so there's a little line there. There's a little railing that goes across here. I could barely see it, so I'm just going to throw it in as little dots and dashes. I'm going to go as light as I can. Some of that gets covered up by that tree, so I don't have to worry about that. However, where the roof line is, that defines the edge of that little tower. So I'm going to continue that through with a line. And I can do little lines where the dormer window is. A little window thing. Just ever so lightly put in my little shapes. And you probably noticed I'm not drawing them where my pencil line is, because I've decided that it wasn't quite right. Here's the shape of that little shadow under there. Just a little triangle. I'm going to do the window the same way I did that other window. So there's the edge there, and then there's the top. And if you want to, you could put a little dot or something down there to just tell you where the edge of that window goes. And I'm just going to hatch through it. Now the roof itself is pretty dark, so I can decide kind of where that roof goes. Come over and say, well, okay, the roof kind of comes down here. Comes over there. Because it's dark, I'm just going to go and do parallel line through it. My lines, I don't want them to be really smooth, and so I'm going to maybe shake a little bit. I shake naturally, so but you can kind of give your little pen a little shake there, or you can just kind of go through. I'm not trying to be real smooth, but I'm barely touching the paper. You just go back and forth, try to get as parallel as you can, and that's going to look like tile. Barely touching the paper. You could always come back into it and add more. It's not quite dark enough, or if you don't like the texture. The whole roof line is going to be done that way. Now, you can tilt your paper to do this if it's easier. For me, I just roll my hand around. Whatever is easiest. And now I'm going to go back into that roof because it's not all the same. I just want to darken in certain areas here and there. So just little dots and dashes wherever you feel like you need to. If your roof is important that it's in a specific place, you can kind of look at it and do that, but I don't think it's important here. I just want it to look like they're not all the same. Sometimes on these old houses, they're made out of shakes, little shingles, little pieces of wood, and the weather will discolor them. Some of them will go lighter, some of them will go darker. Voila, that's it. While I'm here, I might as well do that tree. Your trees, any kind of leaves. Now these are kind of a pine tree, and so you're going to do little straight strokes, little zigzaggy strokes, more than rounded strokes. If your tree was like a poplar or something, you might do little rounded things. So let me show you just the difference between them. And you don't draw this. Just watch what I do. So I can come up and I can say, well, if this is the stem of the tree, and if it's a poplar or, some other type of tree like that, it might have some branches kind of coming off the side like this. And then you're going to have rounded leaves. And they're like little M's and N's. M's on the top, N's or U's on the bottom. And all you do is where the shadows are. Usually the shadows are darker towards the bottom. So you do more on the bottom like this. And you can even just leave little spots kind of hanging out up there. That'll make your tree look kind of fluffy and soft. And you don't have to have it everywhere. You can leave little areas out. For this is a pine tree and it's very dark. So I'm going to do the same kind of thing. I'm going to come up and I'm just going to say, well, there's a middle section there.
I'm just scribble that in. There's a couple limbs that kind of come out and down. And again, it's not important if this tree is exactly the way you see it. What's important is that you just get something similar so it looks okay. So you can have little trees like this. I mean, if you want to make a haunted house, you could leave it like that with those dead tree kind of things. But if you want to put some limbs on there, I'm just going to do these little scribbles. And they're more like little lines, but little small kind of dashy lines. And sometimes you can leave little areas just hanging out up there. I mean, it's not attached to anything, just is hanging out up there. But you understand that there's a limb up there that you can't see. So just leave it out. And you don't have to go in the same direction either. You can go, left and right, up and down. And again, you just leave little sections just kind of hanging out out there. Nothing, they're not even attached to anything. I'm just using my reference as a guide, as inspiration. I'm not really trying to be exact. I'm just scribbling. As it comes into contact with the house, leave out the architecture, whatever it is being defined by the tree. Okay, piece of cake. Easy peasy. It's just scribbles. And like I said, I'm not going in any one direction. I just kind of, whatever feels right. That's your tree. And it's okay to leave little areas out too. In your tree, because that's what happens. You can see through your tree. And you can always come back into this and do more. So I'm going to abandon this tree for a little bit. I can always come back into it if I have time. But the tree's not important. I think the rest of the house is important. So here's my next window. Going to get the top, just where the window goes. Two little lines coming down the center, down the edge. This one is slightly open, so I'm going to leave that slightly open with the little rectangle of darkness at the bottom. Now, you could just leave it like that if you wanted to, but it's a little darker, so I'm going to hatch through it. You don't have to hatch all the way through it if you don't want to. But that's it. That's your window. There's a little edge where the framing is. You could add that. Usually there's a little windowsill underneath. This one I can't see very well. I'm going to put just a couple little dots and dashes where this edge is. I know where that edge is going to be, but I don't want to do a line all the way down. Where the roof line is, though, I can kind of see where the roof line is and carry it through to right. Here's it come right there. And rather than draw a line through everything, just dots and dashes. And because this edge, I went this way, I'm going to do the same thing down here. Just going to hatch through it as fast as I can. If I think it needs to go darker, I can hatch through more. But that's it. Now, this edge does have a little more texture, and if you wanted to put some of that texture in there, you're more than welcome to. You can just kind of go through and just add a couple little lines, little dots and dashes, to just show that there's some texture in there. Otherwise, you could probably just leave it out because there's not that much in there. Or just put a couple in there. Just enough that your viewer understands that there's a little more texture here than there is up there. And the closer your lines are, the darker the value. So if you think, well, that needs to go darker, you just go back into it. Do more lines in between. And remember the little shakes, the little tiles on the top there, and they might get a little darker over there because there's less weathering. Under the eaves over here, there's little supports there, and rather than draw those supports, draw the shadows. So I'm just going to come in and do a little triangle right there. There's one. There's another one. There's another one. So you just draw the little triangles. There's one there, one there, one there. And they're just little dots and dashes. I'm just drawing the shape of the shadow. If you think, well, it's a little darker under there, you could do a little line or shadow or, you know, a little cross hatching or just some little line to just darken in that little edge a little bit. Does it bother you that we've left things out? Or do you look at it and think, oh, that looks interesting? Now all I'm doing is just looking at the shadows, looking at the shapes of those shadows and drawing those in. I'm not thinking of it as, you know, a gingerbread house or whatever. There's a little triangle there, just put in that triangle. A little triangle on the other side, just throw that one in. When you're all done, it'll look like your house. If you're a little skeptical and think, oh, I wonder if that's in the right place, you can draw it in with your pencil first, very lightly. And then if it works out, you can say, okay, that's where it needs to be. And use your ink after that. But it's a house. It's no big deal. So I'm just trying to get those shapes of those little shadows that I see. There's a window in there too, but I hardly see it. So I'm just going to shape that in with some little cross hatching or There's some vines growing up the side of this. Just use those little M's and N's, because the vines are probably like ivy, and they're probably rounded. So you just go M's and N's in the direction you see them. And again, you could leave little sections just kind of hanging out, not attached to anything visibly. They can just be just hanging out up there. You can use little circular motions too if you want to. I tend to go back and forth more, like hatching, but I had a student teacher years ago that everything was circles. And it looked okay. Cross hatch through it to start out with, because it's dark in there. And then just keep adding whatever you feel like you need to. Sometimes I'll sit there and draw things. I have no idea what I'm drawing. I'll just draw the darks and lights, and it isn't until I'm done drawing it that I think, oh yeah, I see what that is. It's not important what it is. Just make darks and lights. So like the railing, all I did is the dark part in between the railings. You can just use little dots and dashes or little lines. This edge here is really still not well defined. You can, if you want to, like part of it is defined by that window that's there. So if I just take that window and move it right over to the edge, hatch through it, that defines that edge. I think it's harder to try and define everything. I think it's easier if you just let it go. And now I'm back to that tree. It helps to define the edge of this building over here. So I can come back into it and let it help me define that edge. It becomes scribbles. Scribble, 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 scribble. I like some of these dead looking limbs up in there, so I'm going to throw those in. And again, don't feel like you need to connect everything. Have some of them just kind of hanging out up there. So I could put a limb not even attached to the other one, just hanging out. Anything that's dark, just throw it in with the hatch marks. Hatch, hatch, hatch. Here's my roof line. Again, I'm going to do those little parallel lines. They don't have to be perfect. So when you're all done, then it'll look like a house. But right now, it's just shapes of dark and light. There's some more pine trees up in there. There's a stem. Maybe some branches hanging out in there. Little dead ones coming out in there. Again, you can just have them just hanging out. They don't need to be attached to anything. Everybody gets it. Those are trees. Controlled scribbling, that's all it is. Down towards the bottom, there's all those trees. And again, what you want to do is just look at the darkest areas and just say, oh, okay, I see those limbs, I'm just going to do the shadows, the darkest areas, and leave the rest of it out. You can always come back in and add more if you need to. So these are just little M's and U's in a kind of a random pattern, but I'm thinking foliage. I'm looking at the darkest areas, trying to just throw in the darkest areas. When you're done, it'll look like trees. Everybody gets that message. And if your trees are really light, you can just do little dots and dashes in the light areas. Everybody gets that. They know what it is. In fact, you can even leave a whole lot out. And if it's dark, if it's really dark, like there's some of these branches over here, they're really dark. You can hatch through them to begin with. Just say this is where that darkness goes, and then do some pattern in between. Here's the rest of this side. Again, I'm not thinking doors and windows and things. I'm just looking at the dark shadows, putting in those shadows, and when I'm done, you look at it and go, oh, I get it. That's a window, or that's a doorway, or whatever. If it's shadow, just hatch through it. As you're finishing up, try to kind of think about where you could put your signature. You don't want it all the way to the edge. You want it up in there somewhere, and it's part of your design. Down in here in the corner, maybe right there would be a good spot. I guess you could put it over here too. Here's some trees hanging out the other side too. Thanks for drawing with me today. Hopefully you had a good time. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully it made your life a little bit better, because art makes life better. And I hope you all have a wonderful day.